Hi, this is Tim Guy. I'm here to talk about my final poster project here for the online teaching course. Sorry if I might miss some things. This is actually the second time I recorded. The first time my volume didn't record, so hopefully it actually records this time. But we're doing a project base here, and I chose to do a Prezi. This was something back in Module 5, I think it was. Somebody went and presented on it. It's something I haven't done for a while, so I wanted to try a Prezi out. So I called mine the online teaching, the building blocks. These are kind of the things that I think I've put together throughout my time here in this online course, and some of the things I really think about online teaching now versus when I started. Looking at this, the first thing here, the student-centered instruction. This is my big teacher philosophy for online teaching and really teaching in general. I think it's really important that your teaching be as student-centered as possible. So this student-centered instruction, I think it's really important. The idea beforehand at the beginning was that, good teaching is good teaching no matter what. We'll actually get to that again later on here. But kind of that idea that the sage on the stage thing doesn't work in the real person world, or not in the real person, in the brick and mortar school, and it also doesn't work in the online classroom. It's really important to have that kind of student-centered, teacher on the side kind of instruction. And my kind of ideal online classroom would have a lot of these different activities in it. Have a lot of small chat groups. I really liked in Module 2 or 3 when we watched the teacher lessons, the teachers who had the students go ahead and do kind of the small groups, the small chat rooms where they kind of work together on things. I think that's something that I think was very productive for those students. And I think it's something I'd really like in my online classroom. I also really like the discovery lessons. If you watch my Module 4, when I went and presented kind of my lesson to my students, it was a discovery lesson, right? Students kind of working with an app called Desmos to kind of figure out some things about rational functions. And I think those discovery lessons are really important as well. They really get students kind of thinking and working together and kind of build some of that classroom chemistry and some good social things that we're looking for. So I think those discovery lessons are really awesome and student-centered. I really want a lot of student involvement no matter what I do. Even if it's synchronously, we're all kind of going through a concept together, having students put problems up on the board, so to speak, or the computer screen through the learning management system or whatever. But I think those things are really important. And then also just class discussions, I think, are hugely important in the online atmosphere. Whether that just be in chat rooms while you're kind of doing something synchronously, whether it be asynchronous class discussions, kind of like what we do currently in this course. I think those things are really important to kind of dig deep and kind of see what students' understanding and not understanding is. And even in addition to that, kind of under class discussions, I also would want some sort of student-teacher communication kind of center where students know where they can go to ask the teacher questions they may have. And then I also think for math, especially online, I think these kind of whiteboard apps and whiteboard activities are really great things to have student-centered instruction. Have the students doing some things either using GoFormative or Nearpod or some of the other things that have whiteboard applications to them, and really kind of use that to see, here's what students are doing, here's some mistakes I'm seeing, here's some things that we can kind of self-correct. And I think it's really important to have that in an online classroom. Next thing we're kind of moving to is the unit that I would teach online. As you can see in here, I also have some of the asynchronous and synchronous activities that I would include in this unit, kind of thrown in here as well. My unit, if you watched my Module 4, was the rational functions unit. So I kind of have a little overview here, just a couple bullet points to show you some of the basic ideas. I don't want to get too mathy on you here. But the introduction would be kind of exploring the continuities, basically what I did in that Module 4 teaching session, where I'd have students kind of using Desmos to explore some things, obviously be a little more in-depth, maybe take a little bit longer than what we did. But that would kind of be to get students ideas of some of these weird things that show up in these rational functions. The next kind of part of my unit I would do would be a rational function kind of joint session where we are synchronously working together, maybe going through a little bit of a lesson together. But while we're doing that synchronously, I'd have students working with whiteboards so they could show me their understanding as they go. That also would be a time where I'd have students, while they're working with me, maybe go off into a small kind of chat group to kind of decide things and come back to me, some of those things I talked about in that last part of my Prezi. The next thing after that, after we kind of get some of that rational function material out there, is that I have students work on some sort of Desmos interactive assignment. One of the things I kind of wish I could show you guys even more about is this Desmos kind of interactive things you can do with it. And there's actually a asynchronous sort of application of Desmos that's new in the last year or so, where you have students kind of do something on their screen, and while they're doing it, it pops up what other students are doing as well, or some other things that students have concluded, and they can kind of compare their conclusions to what other students have said and kind of see some of the same interactions or some of the same thoughts that they might be having. So it's really a cool assignment. It's really some cool things you can do with that, and that's something that could be asynchronous but still involves students to really work with each other and really see the material that's going on. And then last but not least, some class discussions of learning outcomes. That I have at the end, but that could definitely be during some of these activities. We could have some big class discussions. We could have little sub-chat groups. We could even have some of these asynchronous things that we do here in our group. Maybe at the end is sort of a conclusive kind of thing. So those are some of the things I'm thinking about if I were to teach an online unit from the rational functions. And I know that, but a lot of these things kind of come from some of the stuff we saw back in Module 4, and some of these things that people kind of showed me through those, my experience with that learning thing, and then in Module 5 where we kind of screencast tools for each other. I think those are some of the cool things that we've seen. The next thing, some special considerations. So this kind of comes from a lot of different thoughts that I've had about communication asynchronously and synchronously, as well as just in general running an online classroom, and what are some of the challenges and things, and what are some of the things you need to think about when you have an online classroom. And first off, I think that an online classroom you need to be using a learning management system. And some of the things, we looked at the accessibility guidelines in the last unit, and the two that look the best to me in terms of, without even considering those, are D2L and Schoology. But we also talked about how Schoology last time has some of those issues with accessibility. So I think it's really important to have your presentations and your online assignments be as accessible as possible. When I made this Prezi, I tried to use a pre-chosen layout with pre-chosen fonts and easily readable stuff. But so in that case, D2L would probably be the learning management system of choice for me. I also, through some of the reads and things, it's important to give students as much feedback as possible. I have on there immediate and consistent. I think consistency is really important. If you assign it, it's worth giving feedback to. The immediacy, I think, is not, it's important to give it as soon as you can, but obviously you can't give it back as soon as possible, and that kind of leads into the next point I have on there, the number of students in the class. I think that's a consideration. Definitely before I ever taught an online course, I'd want to know, who am I teaching this for? What company am I doing this for? What school am I doing this for? And what really are their goals, and how are they showing me that with the number of students they're giving me? If I had to teach an online course of 20, 30 students, I think that that's definitely feasible and possible. If I had an online course of 40, 50, 60, 70 students, we're not reaching a point where I can't do the job I would need to do to connect with those students and keep them engaged. And I basically would be, the survival of the fittest at that point. I don't think that is really what we need to be seeing. We've seen those issues kind of throughout some of the readings that we've done. Definitely the accommodations accessibility, again, kind of referring back to those guidelines that we looked at in Module 7. I think that those, or Module 6, I forget what number that was. But I think that those accommodations accessibility guidelines are really important, and I want to make sure that anything that I'm doing follows those. And just building a positive social presence, having a positive classroom environment, being a part of student activities, student interactions, being a part of having students communicate with each other, communicate with me, to build that positive social, and building that positive social presence really kind of brings a lot of the things we just read about kind of together. And I think it's important to be able to, some of those other considerations for those synchronous and asynchronous communications, to look at, student grammar. I think that's important to look at what students are responding with, look at how students are interacting with each other, to be an active part of those communities when those students are doing asynchronously. And then when they're doing it synchronously, making sure students are participating, making sure you are driving the instruction and driving the discussion where it needs to be. So I think that these things are really important. And it also leads me to some of my ahas, my biggest ahas. So at the beginning of the course, I think Ollie said to us that, good teaching is good teaching and bad teaching is bad teaching. And I took that as a grain of salt and said, all right, whatever. I kind of, you may not have noticed this from my first couple posts, but I came in with kind of an opinion on online courses to start. But as we kind of went through the course, I kind of saw what he was talking about and really kind of saw the difference between the online teachers who were doing good teaching versus those who were, maybe not, maybe just doing the sage on the stage kind of thing. So this is kind of one of my first biggest ahas, is that, if you're going to do a poor job teaching, you're going to do a poor job online teaching. That's sort of, I'm going to give you the notes and you're going to take them down and then you're going to take a test. And that sort of thing might not work in the online environment, doesn't really work in the brick and mortar school environment. Whereas good teaching is going to be good teaching online. I get my students involved. I have them explore things. I have them try things out. I have them work a lot of problems out. I have them talk with each other. I have them discuss things. And those are the sort of things that will translate well into an online classroom. Okay, they might even translate even better in an online classroom. Whereas you might get away with some of that kind of sage on the stage stuff in school, you're not going to get away with it in the online environment. So I think that's one of the first biggest ahas, is kind of opening my eyes to some of the possibilities of online. And the second is really just the range of students who require online education. We sent that whole, I think it was the third module that we did this, where we looked at some of the students. We watched some of those videos of the students who had to do online, and it really kind of opened my eyes to all the different students who need that sort of thing open to them. Either the students who are on sick leave, I kind of thought about them before, who have those sort of either illnesses or disabilities where they need to be using the online classrooms. But there's also the students who are high performers, or students who are athletes or things like that, or who suffer from social anxiety, who can't be productive in a normal brick and mortar high school. And I think it's really important that we provide the best possible education to these students who have to go into some of these online courses. And if a student chooses to go an online course, they should still be given some of that same high quality education. This kind of leads me to the questions I have kind of at the end here. And this is something that, I kind of always think about with my teaching, is how can I better engage students? But really the question really comes into focus when we're really looking at these online courses, because keeping students engaged in an online course can be difficult and can be hard. And one of the biggest things that I'm interested in kind of looking at further, or questions that I might have, are kind of about those missing students, those students who joined the online environment, who are there for, because they signed up and their name's on your roster and they never show up and they never appear. And how can you better reach those students? How can you have an infrastructure as an online school to meet those students' needs and make sure that those students are an active part of class? In school, if I have a student who's not doing what they're supposed to be doing, I have a lot of different methods because they're physically there. I can, prompt them. I can stand by them. I have a student remind them to be on task. I can do a lot of different things to keep them engaged and as part of the group as possible. Whereas online, you got to think about more things than that. Also, just even looking further into what would be great teaching online. How can we really take some of these student-centered ideas and make them for an online classroom? So that's kind of my poster here, my building blocks that I'm looking at, the kind of things we've put together as we've been here and gone through this course. My, kind of questions for you guys, or questions that you might want to ask me, if you guys have any thoughts about this, I'll definitely be looking around at your videos and see anything that interests me. But thank you guys for your time, and hope you have a nice day.